Welcome back to the Rules Plus podcast. Today's episode is the eighth of 12 preseason episodes focused on the 12 chapters of the Rogers-Redding Study Guide to NCAA Football Rules, now authored by George Demetrio. In the last 7 episodes, we reviewed the corresponding chapters of the study guide, beginning with advice in the opening chapter for productive study using the study guide. The subsequent 6 episodes have covered what the late Rogers-Redding referred to as phases of the game, reflecting his philosophy that our study of the rules should account for the symbiotic, interdependent nature of football rules. If you haven't listened to the earlier episodes, I recommend them to you for their coverage of the guide's chapters 2 through 7 about recent rules changes, the kicking game, scrimmage requirements, the passing game, the running game, and the clock. So on to Chapter 8, Major Fouls, in depth. The term major fouls deserves some clarification. Any foul can have major impact on the outcome of a game, and for officials deciding whether or whether not to call any foul requires considerable judgment and presents ample risk for our reputation. I think you can count on a team that loses a touchdown because it committed an illegal formation foul would consider that to have been a major foul, no less than would a team that gives up an automatic first down because it committed a defensive pass interference foul on 4th down to extend its opponent's winning drive to a field goal. As in medicine, where no surgery is minor if it's your surgery, no foul is minor if it occurs at an inopportune time and place. So it should be apparent that the majorness of a foul, in the sense of Chapter 8, is rule-based, not game outcome-based. And of course, that means we're talking about fouls that carry a 15-yard penalty. Chapter 8 notes that most major fouls involve illegal physical contact that endangers another player's safety, or, in fact, that sometimes endangers the offending player's safety. Those fouls are perhaps the easiest for us to identify. They typically involve striking, blows, ramming, butting, tripping, blocking, or even targeting. But while many blocking infractions result from poor technique, use of legal technique can also be a foul if the block occurs when blocking is prohibited. Compare poor technique fouls, such as blocking in the back or clipping, with poor timing or location fouls, such as blocking in the back or clipping. The former may result from failing to execute, and the latter from failing to satisfy criteria for limited special license to execute such a block, such as being a lineman in the tackle box or making contact within the 10-2 area of an opponent. It's those latter fouls that require us to fully command knowledge of what is allowed and when it's allowed. So, in preparing this episode, I got to wondering what proportion of possible fouls constitute the set of major fouls. I've made some interesting findings. I went to Appendix G for the listing of penalties, and I began counting. Under loss of 5 yards, there are 45 items listed. Under loss of 10 yards, there are 14 items listed. Under loss of 15 yards, there are 45 items. That's 59 so-called minor fouls and 45 so-called major fouls. That's 43% of possible fouls that are major. More importantly, consider the breakdown of the 45 major fouls. The vast majority of major fouls are classified as personal fouls, a total of 20, or as unsportsmanlike conduct fouls, a total of 13. One is simply classified as fighting. That is, 34 of the 45 major fouls constitute violations of provisions in Rule 9. Section 1 of Rule 9 specifically designates personal fouls, and Section 2 of Rule 9 specifically designates unsportsmanlike conduct fouls. At this point, you're thinking, so what? Is there a point to be made here? Well, indeed, there is a very important point. And like so many aspects of football rules, the point is that words matter and seemingly small technicalities aren't so small. Consider penalty enforcement for major fouls. Bear with me as I belabor my build-up to the point I'm looking to make, with two plausible play scenarios for you to consider. Scenario 1. On an ordinary second down play from the A34, as quarterback A12 scrambles to near his sideline looking for an open receiver, A59 disengages from B68. When A12 reverses his scramble, A59 delivers an illegal blindside block on B68. A12's pass is intercepted by B28, who returns the ball for a touchdown. Okay, hang on to that for a moment. Here's scenario 2. On an ordinary second down play from the A34, as quarterback A12 scrambles to near his sideline looking for an open receiver, A12's pass is in the air. An intended receiver A84 hooks and restricts B28, who, nevertheless, intercepts the pass and returns the ball for a touchdown. So, consider what your crew should do in each case. While you think about it, I can tell you what I think many crews would be tempted to do. It's obvious that Team B is going to want to keep its touchdown, which presents no problem because the foul in each case is by Team A. But what happens to the foul in each case? May Team B only carry the penalty over to the try, only carry it over to the subsequent kickoff? May Team B choose between carrying the penalty over to the try or to the subsequent kickoff? Or have we overlooked something else? The foul was by Team A while the ball was still in Team A's possession. So any penalty enforcement would mean nullifying the score and giving the ball back to Team A after enforcement. So Team B would clearly simply want to decline the penalty, right? Well, the answer is in 10.2.5a. I'll quote the provision to make my point. Quote, for fouls by the non-scoring team during a down that ends in a touchdown, not on the try, 15-yard penalties for personal fouls and for unsportsmanlike conduct fouls are enforced on the try, the succeeding kickoff, or from the succeeding spot in extra periods at the option of the scoring team. 5 and 10-yard penalties are declined by rule. End quote. But wait, as just noted, Team A's foul was before possession changed and had nothing to do with the subsequent running play by B28 that ended in the touchdown. And here's what we know from 5.2.3a about a foul before a change of team possession. If a penalty is accepted for a foul that occurs between the goal lines before a change of team possession during a down, the ball belongs to Team A. The down shall be repeated unless the penalty involves loss of down, mandates a first down, or leaves the ball on or beyond the line to gain. Exceptions: Rules 8.3.3b1, 10.2.3, 10.2.4, and 10.2.5. That was quoted, by the way. When you read rules like 5.2.3a, do you typically follow up on the listed exceptions to see what they refer to? Be honest, it's easy to ignore the exceptions and move on in our study. But here, the last exception is the key. It's there in black and white, 10.2.5. In the unicorn case where the non-scoring team commits a personal foul or UNS foul during a down that ends in a touchdown, we ignore the principle that applies 98% of the time that the penalized team keeps the ball for fouls it committed while it possessed the ball. The trouble is that Though we know 10-5, we rarely see a play when Team B is the scoring team and Team A is the fouling team. So, in both scenarios, we give Team B its option to carry the penalty over to the try or to the subsequent kickoff, right? Well, no. Only in scenario one do we do so. And here at last is the point to be made. While A84's foul for offensive pass interference carries a 15-yard penalty, A84's foul is not a personal foul. We know that because it is listed in 738, not in Section 1 of Rule 9, where personal fouls are listed. We also know that if we consult Appendix G and see that the signal for offensive pass interference is number 33, with no prior signal, number 38, designating a personal foul. In scenario 2, Team B must decline the penalty, and the game moves on. The lesson is important. Though the vast majority of major 15-yard fouls are personal fouls or UNS fouls, some are not. And while signal number 38 always identifies a personal foul, some personal fouls merit more special notoriety with their own signal. Among several examples, personal fouls with their own distinctive signal include clipping, signal number 39, blocking below the waist, signal 40, roughing the passer, signal 34, and chop block, signal 41, to name perhaps the most common of these notorious fouls. I'll remind you of two more points and then move on. First, some supervisors, perhaps more accurately, most supervisors, instruct referees these days to precede such distinctive signals with signal number 38, though Appendix G doesn't always indicate that we should do that. Second, 15-yard major fouls by Team B almost always include an automatic first down unless that's in conflict with other rules. If you've ever wondered what such a conflict might be, you're not alone. I think that's a topic to follow up on in some future Rules Plus episode. So, how about major fouls related to blocking, where the blocking zone is contrasted with the tackle box? The NCAA football rules employ a familiar approach to regulating blocking behavior, specifying illegal techniques for making contact with an opponent, but then identifying special circumstances under which such otherwise illegal techniques become magically, albeit briefly, legal. This is the familiar NCAA approach of making a rule and then making exceptions to that rule, and even not infrequently making exceptions to the exceptions. It's this double negative sort of expression that makes studying football rules so challenging. Concerning the fundamental football behavior of blocking, Section 3 of Rule 2 defines 4 core types of blocks: blocking below the waist, chop blocking, blocking in the back, and blindside block. Section 3 also defines 2 key concepts related to determining the legality of the 4 techniques: frame of the body and blocking zone. More on those concepts in a moment. Curiously, a 5th technique we'd all recognize as a type of block is absent from Section 3: clipping, which is defined by itself in Section 5, comprising the only topic in that section. The definitions largely, but not solely, confine themselves to answering the what question. Questions about legality are addressed in detail in Rule 9. It doesn't hurt for us to review the verbatim definitions of these 5 types of blocks. Block below the waist. Quote, a block in which the force of the initial contact is below the waist of an opponent who has one or both feet on the ground. If the blocker first contacts the opposing player's hands at the waist or above, it is a legal above the waist block. End quote. Chop block. Quote, a high-low or low-high combination block by any two players against an opponent, not the ball carrier, anywhere on the field with or without a delay between blocks. It is not a foul if the blocker's opponent initiates the contact. End quote. Block in the back. Quote, contact against any opponent occurring when the force of the initial contact is from behind and above the waist. The position of the blocker's head or feet does not necessarily indicate the point of initial contact. End quote. Blind side block. Quote, an open field block against an opponent that is initiated from outside the opponent's field of vision, or otherwise in such a manner that the opponent cannot reasonably defend himself against the block. End quote. And finally, clipping. Quote, a block against an opponent in which the force of the initial contact is from behind and at or below the waist. The position of the blocker's head or feet does not necessarily indicate the point of initial contact. Notice that the clipping definition explicitly notes that it is a block, and the language that is used is parallel with the language of the definition of a block in the back, and that clearly indicates that clipping is simply a special case of a block in the back. Now, let me return to the concepts in Section 3 concerning frame of the body and the blocking zone. The frame concept has been around for a long time, but the blocking zone concept only just appeared as a rules change, or more precisely, as a rules addition, in 2009. Since 2009, the Rules Committee struggled mightily to advance the process of incrementally eliminating dangerous blocking below the waist, and the introduction of the blocking zone was an important innovation and first step in pursuit of that goal. In the 2009 Football Rules book, prohibition against clipping and the exceptions to that prohibition were located in Article 2 of Section 1 of Rule 9. At that time, prohibitions for all the 5 types of blocks were all folded into that one article, along with all the other various restrictions that applied to persons subject to the rules, such as striking, twisting, tripping, and the full collection of proscribed dastardly behavior. Today, the set of prohibitions associated with each of the 5 types of blocks are each afforded its own distinct article in Section 1 of Rule 9 that consists of all manner of behaviors that constitute personal fouls. What has not changed since 2009 is reference to the blocking zone as the quickly vanishing safe place where clipping is briefly legal for certain players, as well as reference to the tackle box as the parallel, quickly vanishing safe place where blocking below the waist and blocking in the back are briefly legal for certain players. Notably, chop blocks and blindside blocks are apparently so lethally dangerous that there are no exceptions to their illegality. The point is, why does the concept of a blocking zone still exist, showing potential for confusion for officials, coaches, and players alike? The two concepts are nearly identical. See for yourself in the two definitions. Blocking zone, 2, 3, 6. There are 5 provisions. It is a rectangle, centered on the middle lineman of the offensive formation, extending 5 yards laterally, extending 3 yards longitudinally in each direction, and which disintegrates when the ball leaves the zone. The tackle box, defined in 234.1. It's a rectangular area enclosed by the neutral zone, by 2 lines parallel to the sidelines 5 yards from the snapper, by Team A's end line, and which disintegrates when the ball leaves it. Compare the two constructs feature by feature. Each one is rectangular. The blocking zone is centered on the middle lineman of the formation, while the tackle box is centered on the snapper, a difference that in the vast majority of plays is indistinguishable. Each one is 10 yards wide from its middle point. The zone is only 6 yards long, split by the neutral zone, while the box extends a yard beyond the neutral zone and all the way back to the end line behind the neutral zone. Remember, in 916A1, you'll find the clarification that, quote, a block initiated 1 yard beyond the neutral zone is considered within the tackle box, end quote. Finally, each construct provides that it disintegrates when the ball leaves the area. The definition of the blocking zone is right where it was placed in 2009, within the Section 3 concerning blocking. Also, in 2009, there were comparative diagrams of the blocking zone and the tackle box in a prominent location immediately preceding the start of Rule 1. There is no diagram of the blocking zone in today's Appendix D. The definition of the tackle box, meanwhile, is appended to the very end of Rule 2 as a sort of caboose or even afterthought, yet it does merit its own exclusive illustrative diagram in Appendix D. Small as these differences may be, identifying them, I suggest, reveals an important, if implicit, philosophical difference that isn't so small. Chapter 8 notes that clipping and blocking from behind are allowed in some special circumstances that are anchored in players' initial formation and activity relative to the blocking zone. Blocking below the waist, on the other hand, is also allowed in some special circumstances, but those circumstances are anchored in formation and activity relative to the tackle box. That is, in short, clipping and blocking in the back are governed by the blocking zone. Blocking below the waist is governed by the tackle box. I suggest that this difference in governing provisions reveals an implicit philosophical position that contact from behind is inherently riskier than contact that an opponent can see coming and thus can prepare for, even if that looming contact is below the waist. After all, we've recently seen considerable restriction imposed on making blindside blocks, further confirming that the Rules Committee is wary of players receiving unanticipated forceful contact. Here's a telling example from Chapter 8 that I find offers compelling evidence that blocking rules are evolving to protect vulnerable opponents from contact they can't see coming, and maintaining a distinction between the blocking zone and the tackle box is instrumental in doing so. Quote, Example 8-2. A12 drops back 7 yards to the A15 and completes a pass to a wide receiver. Lineman A68, beaten on the play by B79, who avoided A68's initial block, is 5 yards behind the neutral zone when he pushes B79 in the back above the waist. Ruling? No foul by A68. Such actions involving pass protection while the passer remains inside the tackle box are within the spirit of the exception to 935 and are thus legal. If the block was a totally separate action and a new block outside the blocking zone, it would be a foul. End quote. We've seen that the tackle box extends to the end line, but that the blocking zone is only 3 yards deep. Invoking the blocking zone to justify calling a foul for a new blocking action 5 yards deep confirms that the Rules Committee does not wish to grant license to Team A linemen to track down defenders whose focus is on the passer, not on a lineman he has already beaten. Major fouls related to the defense. To this point, the discussion has been about the offense, because after all, that's the side of the ball most typically involved with blocking. But there are three topics to address concerning prohibitions on the activity of Team B players. Chapter 8 notes that the rules for holding by the defensive team are more liberal than those for the offense because it's the job of the defense to tackle the ball carrier. So I'm going to touch briefly on holding by the defense, tackling by the defense, and use of hands or arms by either team in pursuit of a loose ball. Topic 1. Defensive holding. Chapter 8 suggests, perhaps naively, that, quote, in most cases, end quote, there is, quote, no advantage to holding an offensive player, so it is rarely seen, end quote. I'm not sure that it's all that rare, given today's vertical passing game and the desperation of linebackers and defensive backs to disrupt the route of receivers, and given the increased sophistication with which defenses are trying to prevent quick offensive linemen and running backs from getting to the next level to pick off linebackers. But Chapter 8 does recognize that otherwise legal blocks against eligible receivers are restricted by the so-called same yard line idea in 934E. The idea is, the chapter says, quote, that once the offensive player gets even with the defensive back, the offensive player is less likely to block, so he is not a threat to the defensive player, end quote. Topic 2, tackling. In the Rules Plus episode 2 weeks ago concerning the running game, covered in Chapter 6, you'll find extended discussion of the many ways that the rules exclude ball carriers from the protections every other player enjoys. For example, take the provisions covering chop blocks. We've already seen that chop blocks are regarded as so serious a safety risk that there are no circumstances in which exceptions are made to allow a chop block, unlike in the case of blocking below the waist or even clipping. Yet, look again at the definition of chop block in 233 we just looked at. Quote, a chop block is a high-low or low-high combination block by any two players against an opponent, not the ball carrier, anywhere on the field, end quote. With just an inconspicuous parenthetical phrase, a major exception is slipped into the rule like it's no big deal. The rules book is packed with these disguised, you might even say flippant, exceptions about a number of things, but certainly in many, many cases about things that are legal for bringing down a ball carrier, but not for contacting anyone else. However, I should add that one of the few 2024 rules changes has actually mandated expanded protection for a ball carrier from the danger of a horse collar tackle. Previously, you'll recall, a horse collar takedown inside the tackle box was legal, but that is true no more. Topic 3, use of hands or arms in pursuit of a loose ball. Thanks to the Philadelphia Eagles and the tush push or brotherly shove, we've grown more accustomed to seeing teammates on offense shove and assist a teammate. In similar fashion, 934A and 934B give any player license to use his hands or arms to push an opponent out of the way in an actual attempt to get to a ball loose from a fumble, backward pass, or kick. But a player may not grab or pull an opponent to get at a loose ball, although a defender may do so in an attempt to get to a ball carrier. Where have we heard an exception like that before? Batting and kicking the ball. Major 10-yard fouls. While we're talking about loose ball situations, it makes sense to talk about the fouls associated with batting and kicking, though these fouls carry a 10-yard penalty instead of 15 yards. but the fouls are included in Chapter 8, so I'm on board with regarding them as major fouls. They are also rare fouls, so for that reason they can really scare you when you see them happen during an otherwise pretty routine game. Chapter 8 cautions that many officials believe it is always illegal to bat or kick any loose ball. They're correct about kicking a loose ball, but not about batting one. Batting, like kicking, is an intentional act, defined in 2:11.3 as deliberately striking the ball or changing its direction with the hands or arms. There are 6 circumstances listed when batting is perfectly legal. 1. Any player eligible to touch a forward pass may bat it in any direction. We don't always think of a forward pass in flight as a loose ball, yet that is what it is, just like a backward pass, a fumble, or a kick. 2. A defensive player may bat a backward pass in flight in any direction, but an offensive player may only bat it backward. 3. A ball in possession may be batted forward, except by a member of the team in possession. Of course, the ball is not loose in such a situation, but batting is indeed possible, as we see often these days by defenders who attempt to smash the ball loose instead of simply complete a tackle. 4. A player may block a scrimmage kick, but he may not bat the resulting loose ball forward. 5. A player may not bat a loose ball in the end zone in any direction, but if Team A does so to a ball untouched by Team B in Team B's end zone, the result is a violation, not a foul. 6. Any loose ball may be batted backward, except if the action constitutes kick-catch interference. The penalty is 10 yards, as mentioned, with a loss of down, unless Team A bats a backward pass forward or bats a ball in possession of a teammate forward. Illegally kicking or batting a loose ball is enforced from the basic spot, which means the 3-and-1 principle applies, which means, for example, that Team A fouls behind the neutral zone are spot fouls. And here's an interesting interpretation in Chapter 8. A player may slap or strike a loose ball while attempting to recover it, but even though the act may be intentional, such an attempt should be regarded as muffing the ball rather than batting it. Only in the absence of an attempt to secure possession should the action be regarded as batting. Remember that illegally kicking a loose ball is a different foul than an illegal kick. And be sure to brush up on the issue of initial impetus, status of the ball, and new impetus in 8.7.2. Responsibility for a ball's impetus is assigned to the player who kicks, passes, snaps, or fumbles the ball, even if the ball's direction is deflected or reversed after striking the ground, an official, or a player of either team. Initial impetus is expended, and the ball's further progress is attributed to a player who kicks any loose ball or bats a loose ball after it strikes the ground. The same is true of a ball that has come to rest. New impetus may change who is responsible for the ball being in an end zone, but it does not change the status that the ball assumed when it originally became loose. Well, here are 2 closing examples from Chapter 8 that serve as cautionary tales. Example 8-57. 2nd and 5 at the A40. At the A45, A88 leaps to receive a legal forward pass. Still in the air, A88 flips the ball to eligible A25, who is at the A49. A25 catches the ball and is driven out of bounds at the B40. Ruling: legal play. A88 has not caught the pass because he did not come to the ground in possession of the ball, and his action in flipping the ball to A25 satisfies the definition of batting. A25 has caught a legal forward pass, and there is only one pass on the play. So, Team A has first and 10 at the B40. Perhaps not the outcome you expected. And here's example 8-58. A free kick is muffed in flight by a Team B player in his end zone. While the ball is loose in the end zone, a Team B player bats the ball out of the end zone. Ruling, the result of the play is a touchback, with a Team B foul for illegally batting a ball in the end zone. The penalty would be 10 yards from the previous spot. Post-scrimmage kick enforcement does not apply during a free kick. A closing word. I hope you'll make time to listen to next week's episode for discussion of Chapter 9 of the Reading Study Guide, covering scoring. Remember, I'm a member of the Austin Football Officials Association, and we're open for new applicants right now. Our extensive training in the classroom, through Zoom, and with on-field experience in 4 locations in the Central Texas area has begun, so don't delay. We're very pleased to see that we have a large rookie class of men and women. If you'd like to learn more about us, contact us. You can email us at recruiting@afoa.ws, visit our website at www.austinfootballofficials.org, call us at 512-298-2987, or follow us on your favorite social media platforms, including Instagram at ATX Football Refs and Facebook at Austin Football Officials Association. Until next time, have a great week.